Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar today. What current network hardware trends mean for MSPs? I'm your host, Alex Hoff. I'm one of the co-founders of Auvik Networks, and I am the Chief Product Officer here. Before we get started, I'm just going to cover a quick of the housekeeping issues. If you're not a Zoom user, please just double check your settings. Hopefully you can all hear me. You can dial in with your phone or through the app. Throughout the webinar, please keep this interactive. We're going to cover a lot of great topics, and we have some awesome guests with us today. So if you have any questions, please feel free to post them into the chat feature of Zoom. One of my colleagues, Sarah, will be in there, and we'll post those to us, and we will try to answer them as we go. The webinar will be recorded and posted at auvik.com/franklymsp as soon as possible, usually within a day or two, in case you want to share this with a buddy or just want to go back and review some of the topics. As mentioned, I am your host, Alex Hoff. That is a wickedly old picture of myself. I am only a few years older than I look in that photo. As I said, I am the co-founder and chief product officer. Joining me today are a number of esteemed colleagues from within the industry. They give an interesting perspective into what's going on in the network hardware space. First up, Eric Simpson, prolific channel consultant. He's a former MSP, and today is focused on his channel clients, making them super successful. Hi, Eric.
How's it going, Hoff?
Oh, hey, there you are. Excellent. Your audio works. Second, we've got Eric Simpson. Second, we've got Rich Freeman, executive editor at the Channel Pro Network. He's got over 25 years of experience covering the IT channel. Welcome, Rich.
And thank you, Alex.
I got great audio today. Perfect. Next up is my buddy, Corey Kirkendall. He's the founder and CEO of 5K Technical Services and one of the most insightful MSPs I've had the opportunity to work with. No offense, Travis. We'll get to you next.
Hey, Alex, thanks.
And that, last but not least, Travis, one of the white whale MSPs that I had personally tried to work with in the early days of Auvik, and I am honored to have him here as part of this webinar today. Travis, thank you very much for joining.
My pleasure. Thanks, Alex.
All right. So for those who are not familiar with Auvik today, we're just going to do a quick introduction. This isn't a webinar about ourselves, more just of a quick introduction to kind of frame this conversation. So we are a network management solution provider focused at the MSP channel. 100% channel focused, as I said. We've got offices around the world, but we are headquartered in Waterloo, Ontario. And if you don't know where Waterloo is, if you remember that BlackBerry thing, you're old enough to remember what the BlackBerry was. We're actually situated in one of its old factories, which is kind of neat. The walls are lined with dead devices, we joke. So we've had a pretty good run, thanks to partners like the individuals on our call today, and we've grown to over 2,000 partners. And if you leave here today and you don't learn anything, I want to explain what an Auvik is, and I do this at every opportunity I get. Everyone asks, how'd you come up with that name? I like to say that there's a number of different ways to come up with domain names other than they have to be free. You mine a different language. Being Canadian, we mine the Inuit language, and Auvik is a building block for an igloo. So if you look at that little swoosh up at the top there, that's a little igloo. And so we had to play hard on the Canadian theme, and we have a polar bear as a mascot named Nanook. All right. This, as a number of the other thought leadership activities that we put in here, is really about trying to educate the community on MSP, how to drive, be an awesome MSP. So we're holding our first live event. If you haven't heard the podcast, I highly recommend that. So please check this out. There's a promo code there, but we're hosting this, our first ever event in Santa Barbara. All right. So what are some of the biggest trends that we are seeing there? And what do MSPs need to know about this? So we conducted this analysis of the market. So we looked at a lot of what our MSPs are deploying Auvik on, and we aggregated all that data up, and we saw a couple really interesting things. So this is not the first time we run this report. It's actually the second time. And we've been able to look at a couple things and identify some trends here. So first off, if you're a managed service provider, you manage your clients' networks. There's a lot of different vendors out there. In fact, we saw 115 vendors representing the landscape. What was really interesting was the number of network vendors that an MSP would manage within their portfolio of clients. So we thought that this would be a trend that we would see going backwards. We saw that MSPs would be managing less vendors. Instead, what the data showed us was that on average, MSPs are having to manage more vendors. As they're continuing to scale, as there's new entrants into the market, we are seeing more and more vendors in there. And this presents a problem. So, I'll open it up to the panel already. Rich, what are you seeing here? How do you think, what are the trends that are emerging in the space that are driving this away from standardization?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because I experience this myself. I'm obviously not an MSP, so I don't have to manage products from these vendors, but covering the industry, I certainly find myself writing about more and more networking vendors. In the old days, you wrote about Cisco and 2 or 3 other big names, and that was pretty much all you had to worry about. These days, and I think the underlying issue basically is the emergence of SD-WAN as an important new technology. I think that's attracting a lot of new players into the marketplace. And so I find myself writing about companies whose names don't even appear in your report, like Zyzel and Untangle and Adtran, that are all introducing networking products, usually specifically for SD-WAN, but it's just turning into a really crowded market.
Fascinating. Travis, given that you're an MSP, does this data reinforce what you're seeing in the marketplace? Share your thoughts.
Yeah, so what we're seeing is when we onboard new clients, generally what we try to do is we try to standardize on a certain stack, and it depends on the client. If it's an organization that has generally taken technology seriously in terms of looking at it as an investment for their business, they generally have a pretty standard stack that's HP, Dell, Cisco, SonicWall, etc. But when we onboard new clients and find that they've been less mature in the way that they're looking at technology, then we find a lot of these smaller niche brands, and while they can usually be functional, we tend to replace them as soon as we possibly can, just because it makes management much easier. And the way our business is structured is we like to have standardization across the board, so we minimize the number of vendors that we try to work with.
So you would not put yourself in that bucket of 11 to 20, hopefully. So Eric, you provide insights, coaching, mentorship to a number of MSPs. Why is what Travis said so important to the success and growth of MSP?
Well, I think that, a lot of benefits come from standardization, including cost efficiencies, not having to have your technicians and organization, sales professionals learn how to sell every, different type of firewall or router or antivirus, known to man. So there are a lot of efficiencies from a cost savings perspective that can be realized, and also standardizing on these core deliverables. I see that happening more frequently at an accelerated pace the higher the operational maturity level of the MSP is. So I think when we're starting out or have a lower operational maturity level, we're accepting environments just to close opportunities. And as we grow and understand the drivers behind profitability and behind sales improvement outcomes, instead of accepting these environments as they come to us, we are now dictating what a minimum certified network, quote unquote, is to us, and why that's valuable to not only our organization, but to also our client organization. So, the more that we can accelerate the velocity towards that higher level of operational maturity and increasing our sales acumen and increasing our service delivery focus around focusing on a core set of services, solutions, including hardware and software, there's also benefits from the vendor side, right? So we can be seen as that go-to partner that vendors are more willing to invest time, effort, energy, MDF, and all these other benefits when they know that we're all in with their services or solutions or stack. So there's a lot of different benefits on all sides of the fence here.
Yeah, I think you speak a lot about the operational maturity. It's something that I've grown to learn and love. But let's make it a little bit more tactical for the participants on this webinar today. Like, if you have to manage 20 different versions of hardware, 20 different vendors, that's 20 different UIs, that's 20 different CLIs, that's 20 different ways to configure an ACL rule, spin up a new SSID. And what does that mean to your team? It either means a lot more training, or it means a lot more flailing in the wind when you get a ticket saying, hey, can you help me with this? Or can you troubleshoot that? It means your team is just going to be super inefficient of trying to figure out how to take the equipment and drive it to the desired outcome. And so, what we've seen with certain vendors is largely, how do you reduce, or certain MSPs, I should say, how do you reduce that down so we only have to train on 1, 2, or 3 different things? And it turns out from the data, that's a challenge. All right, let's jump on to the next point here. I would say we looked at the data. Now, if we took the data that we had across the 40,000 different SMBs and we sliced it a little bit differently, and we look at what are the types of devices. Rich touched on the router thing. I'll go back to that in a moment. But let's just talk a little bit about access points. I mean, wireless is ubiquitous in the environments today with the emergence of Wi-Fi 6, which is, I don't know why they moved away from AC and they call it Wi-Fi 6 now. Maybe they got bored of 2-letter acronyms. But largely, we're seeing more and more access points being deployed in the environment. We'll talk about some of the vendors that are emerging here. But I think this is really a sign of things to come, more mobile devices, more IoT devices. Corey, I've used your IoT stories time and time again, and I've referenced them, so, credit where credit's due. Talk a little bit about why clients are asking for more Wi-Fi. What does this mean to the SMB? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so what I'm seeing a lot of the clients really want to do is they want to be as mobile as they possibly can. So they're investing into the right Wi-Fi infrastructure in their buildings up front, cutting down on as much hardwire cabling as they can and putting it only in there where it's necessary. But also, it's also driving some of the IoT stuff you're talking about, like wireless thermostats, right? What are they doing from that perspective? How they're doing building control? All that stuff is coming in as well. So it's very difficult, and some of it is post-construction, so it's harder to go back and wire. So it's easier to go the Wi-Fi route, which is therefore driving what I'm seeing a lot more access points than we've seen in the past.
Like I have a firm belief that wired's always better than wireless. But yeah, to your point, you can't always retrofit. It is easier to add wireless capacity, and certainly with generation 6 now, the channel bandwidth is so high, like you can get a lot of awesome throughput through these devices. And hopefully people will stop complaining why my Wi-Fi sucks, and they start, giving you productive feedback about how to run the business. So,
well, Hoff, one of the things that we run to is I totally agree with Corey on this. What we're seeing is it comes down to convenience. It's generally a lot more convenient to install a wireless infrastructure. And it facilitates that mobile workforce. People can move throughout the office as more companies hand out laptops versus traditional desktops, using tablets, et cetera. It really makes it a lot more convenient. That being said, the opportunity for the MSP here is that MSPs have to be very careful to properly architect the solution so that you're putting in something that will be very reliable. And so this is where I think when you start talking about the multitude of vendors of wireless access points, it's one of those things where you don't want to take many risks. It's got to be solid because that's the platform upon which the entire operation will run. So you got to be darn sure that what you're putting in is properly scoped and it's quality. It's not one area where you want to skimp.
Yeah, and if you look at the data, which I don't have on this slide right now, 4 vendors dominate the access point market. So yeah, very, very good point. Switching gears back to routers, I'll kick this one over to Rich in a moment, but you know, when we saw routers, I would say routers are an artifact of the old telco MSO days, where in order to get connectivity between your offices, you needed Metro Ethernet, you needed MPLS or whatever flavor du jour technology that they were selling. Now, with the emergence of SD-WAN, like Rich pointed out, we're seeing that capability either show up as standalone devices or inside the firewalls themselves. Rich, do you want to come back to that point and share kind of what you're seeing here, and how does this change the landscape? What problems are SMBs trying to solve here?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, the first thing to point out, just this is a huge, from a vendor standpoint, this is an enormous opportunity. There's data from IDC suggesting that the SD-WAN market's going to grow at like a 30.8% compound annual growth rate through 2023 to $5.25 billion. So there's a big pile of money out there that has the vendors very excited. They're pouring into the market, going after those dollars with products that are in many cases tailored specifically to the SMB, and just looking to provide, you know, for a new generation of SMB that's all in on the cloud and is looking for reliable, high-speed, flexible, cost-effective connectivity. There are a lot of advantages around SD-WAN. So I mean, you sort of combine what is likely to be increased demand on the end user side with a great deal of appetite for SD-WAN revenue on the vendor side. And I think this is going to be one of, you know, the SD-WAN is going to be one of, if not the biggest game changer in networking in the next few years.
To the MSPs on the call, what do you guys think? Is this something that you guys are seeing as well?
Yeah, this is Corey. Yeah, I'd say definitely. I mean, with the increased scrutiny on security and things of that situation, that right now a router used to be kind of the table stakes on the floor for connectivity. Now it's a true UTM firewall is the base that you have to start out with and go with, and that's just the first layer that you should have in place going forward. I don't foresee, or we don't put out any just plain routers. Everything we have has to be a managed firewall or a firewall in order to bring some level of security to the end customers as we go forward. So I think that the firewalls will become the norm, and I expect to see routers just continue to just die out.
Yeah, I'm with Corey on that one. What we have in every single environment, we have a UTM in front of the network. And for larger organizations we work with, especially those that are multi-site, SD-WAN is becoming a bigger thing for them to invest in. It's kind of replacing MPLS in a lot of ways. And but regardless, you don't rely on you don't rely on the router alone. There's got to be a firewall in there as well.
Yeah, I think Shrek said this best. It's layers, man, layers. Everyone loves a trifle, or was that donkey? I don't remember, but absolutely. So let's jump into the next piece of data I wanted to share today. So fragmentation, we talked about this and how it can really adversely affect your efficiency. However, there's 124 vendors out there. Like, that's insane number of vendors. And so the dominant vendors are still, I would call them, quote unquote, the big dogs, Cisco and HP. Different movements in the relative position between these two year over year, but like still a ton of different vendors out there. So Eric, do you see consolidation happening here? Do you think that there's going to be more vendors in the switching space, which I would call almost an unsexy space? It's really just product, just getting you connectivity, or are you going to see consolidation, or do you have a different opinion here? Like, and when you look at this slide, what do you see? What are your thoughts?
Well, the first thought that comes to mind is, doesn't look like anybody's getting fired for dropping Cisco or HP in, right? So that's a pretty dominant position. I think that, looking at trending that we've been tracking over the last, 12, 24, 36 months, I can't say that there aren't going to be other players in the market, because while Cisco and HP do own the lion's share here, there still seems to be a sense that there's opportunity out there from some of these new vendors. I mean, we've seen a couple of new vendors pop up just the last couple of quarters here. So it's, again, I remember when I was running my MSP, and we had what we used to call the Netgear clients, and we had the Cisco clients, right? So there was always that option of going in with something a little bit more affordable, but not quite having all the enterprise bells and whistles that some of the Cisco clients, were willing to invest in. So I think from an MSP perspective, we may need a lower cost option for some of these implementations. And that's why we see, the plethora of kind of these second tier vendors being, making headway in the space, even though they're kind of just fighting over the last 35% there, right?
So
Yeah, go ahead, Hoff.
I was just going to say, like the two largest gainers in this marketplace were top end stuff like Meraki and more feature rich, roll your own Ubiquity, like absolutely phenomenal products, but very different target audiences. So yeah, please.
What I was going to say, Hoff, is that Cisco's facing kind of the same problem that I would say a lot of MSPs face, and that is Cisco and HP are the dominant players, but if they are not continually demonstrating their value and why they are worth the premium that they charge, then a lot of people will look at the switch marketplace and say, listen, it's got to pass packets, I've got to be able to get decent support on it, and it's got to be able to meet the requirements of, let's call it 95% of the marketplace. It kind of reminds me of the first iPod when it came out. And for those who are old enough to remember, and I had the first generation iPod, everybody was up in arms on the internet. All the digerati were complaining that the iPod didn't support these weird esoteric formats like OGG Vorbis that nobody in the world cared about. And Steve Jobs made a good point, and he said, listen, we built the iPod to serve the 95% of the market who want a music player. For those of you who have special requirements, we're not the product for you. And I think that switches are very quickly outside of that 5, maybe 10% share of the market. For the most part, we look at switches and say, does it pass traffic? Does it have good support? And does it do what we need it to do? Yes. And so for our case, we sell primarily Netgear, Professional, Dell, and Ubiquity switches because they're generally a fraction of the price and they do the same job.
That's really interesting. And how do you pick or position which product into which type of customer? What are some of the criteria that you use? And then follow up to that is Corey. I'd love to hear your opinion there too.
So the majority of our client base is going to be organizations that are about 250 seats or less. And we've got a handful of clients that are 500 seat plus, some that are 1,000 seat and larger. But to be honest with you, what it's come down to is when it's time to refresh that infrastructure and they say to us, okay, Ashton, what's it going to cost us to replace this Cisco Catalyst or this entire Cisco infrastructure with Cisco? We'll bring the numbers back to them and they kind of, after they stagger about for a few minutes, we then come to them with the alternatives. And in most of these cases, they really don't have any special needs or special requirements. If they did, and Cisco fit the bill, then we'd suggest Cisco. But in most of these cases, like I said before, they're just passing traffic and packets rather. So when we present to them the cost difference between the two, it's almost without a doubt, they're going to say, yeah, let's get the Netgear, let's get the Dell. And we've had very good success over the last 10 years doing that.
Excellent. Corey, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Trevor, hey, I agree with everything you said. We follow a model of the good, better, best kind of a situation. And a lot of time it comes down to, like you said, is what is the switch going to be doing and what does the ultimate network going to be pushing through. So we follow the Ubiquity, we use Netgear, as well as we use AdTrans switches as well. some customers come to us and ask us very specifically. They want either the HPE Aruba or they want a Cisco switch, and at that point, we go down the route of what they want because that's what they kind of standardize on. But any other time, we really look at it for, what are they doing from a voice video type of situation internal? Do they need, only 1 gig or can bond up to 4 or need 10 gig to go above for future growth? And it's really all about where they are today and where they want to go in the next 2 to 3 years, because that switch is pretty much gonna stand in there. When you look at what's happening, just about every last one of them come with limited lifetime warranty, so you can pretty much swap it out. The Ubiquiti and the other players, you don't have to have that hefty price tag of that support contract alone, so you pay, $10 for the switch and $3,000 for the support. You kind of seeing that go away because they kind of build it in, and all of them are coming cloud managed. So it really, at the point, is what is your team familiar with? Does it support the features that your customer need? And is it going to be able to sustain for the next 3 to 4 years of what the customer needs, and not have to rip and replace out?
Awesome. Very good, guys.
And
All right.
Hoff, before we go on there, I want to throw one other thing in there. Going back to your comment before about standardization, we've been in situations where we've gone into larger organizations that had, in one example, extreme switches. And we were brought in because there was they were having some network, let's call it network funkiness for lack of a more technical term. And it's one of those things where we tried to find support for the extreme switches. It wasn't great support. We brought in some additional expertise into it, and we still couldn't figure out what was going on. And what we ended up doing was saying to the client, listen, if we were to bring in a solution from Netgear or Dell or whomever, and it will solve this problem that you're having, would you be open to it? And they said, well, yes, because we're in so much pain. And we actually were able to bring in this other solution from Dell, Dell switches, because our team knows Dell switches. We know how to manage the heck out of them. And we know that over the last 20 some years, we've never had a problem with Dell switches. We dropped them in, solved the problem, made the client very happy. Cost them some money, but it solved a major headache for them. It goes back to sometimes you're better off ripping off the Band-Aid and going to what you can guarantee and trust versus trying to figure out something that you're not familiar with.
Yeah, I think that's true of almost anything. You drop me into an environment, I'm not a Windows admin. I'm more comfortable in Linux. You drop me into a Windows Active Directory server and it'd be like, yeah. And so that standardization, the comfort, they trust you, you're the expert. Yes, they're gonna have to make a small capital investment, but you get better stability, more reliability, and that's ultimately why they've trusted you, they partnered with you to make them successful with their job. Awesome, great. So going back and just looking at all the other vendors in the ecosystem, I kind of talked a little about the big gains by Meraki and Ubiquiti, but what was interesting this year, despite Cisco having a massive market share overall across all the different types of devices, we did see them drop a little bit. And we made a couple assumptions, and I will put them out as assumptions because we don't have the firm data to back it up. A lot of this has to do with just the relative growth of the ecosystem, other vendors growing. It's not like Cisco is going down, but more vendors are showing up. But one of the other little interesting things here is, hey, like their ASA firewalls have been, you guys have been selling these for years upon years, and there's thousands of deployed, actually I think tens of thousands deployed in our ecosystem. And a lot of them are end of life now, end of sale, and they're due for a refresh. And so I know Cisco had launched their Firepower at Cisco Live. It was early this year or late last year. My facts straight on that one. But what do you guys think is going to happen here? Do you think customers going to be like, go with the trusted? Is this something that MSPs want to innovate on, or are they going to go back to using the newer technologies, the SD-WAN technologies, to solve a problem in a different way? Or will they just look at security and say, you know what, it's not about the perimeter, it's about the SIM, the SOC, the EDR, all those other technologies. Eric, what are you seeing here again? When you speak to your MSPs, what are some of the top business challenges that they see, and how does that come back to the network?
I think that the more strategic MSPs that I work with are trying to skate to where the puck is going to be. As the great Wayne Gretzky once said, how do you become so successful, I don't skate to where the puck is. I skate to where the puck is going to be. But again, that, you know, that requires a high level of strategic operational maturity. I think a lot of MSPs are very comfortable with where they are. And I think that, you know, in order for these decisions to be made, there has to be some sort of a catalyst that drives that, or a pain. You know, it reminds me of that old cartoon where the guy is sitting on the bench with his dog, and the dog's just got this pained look on his face. And there's a passerby that says, "Hey, is that your dog?" He says, "Yeah, it's my dog." He says, why has he got that look on his face?" He says, "Well, he's sitting on a nail." "Well, why doesn't he move?" Doesn't hurt enough yet, right? So it's pretty funny when you think about it that way. But until we, and I think it's also, you know, as we start working with larger and larger clients, or clients that have more specific requirements such as compliance and regulations and things like that, that's when we start to see, you know, these shifts to maybe new technology. Because, you know, as we all know, it's, you know, it's tough to rip and replace things. Or what do you do when you have a client that's just invested in, you know, a heavy duty piece of hardware, and, you know, you don't support that yet? So there are a lot of factors that go into some of these decisions. But I think, you know, in order to stay ahead of the curve and to distinguish and differentiate ourselves in the market, we have to be skating to where the puck is. We have to be looking at these new emerging technologies like SD-WAN, like AI, you know, like business intelligence and things like that. Because, you know, over time, a lot of the hardware that we support today is going to go away. It's all going to the cloud. So these computing devices are going to become less and less important. Of course, you know, the infrastructure stuff, the core stuff is going to be more important. But we have to think about what our ultimate value proposition is. You know, what are we going to look like as MSPs 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? We're going to be looking a lot different. And if we're strategic about it, we'll be making moves in that direction now.
Excellent, excellent insights. So I'll kick this question over to Rich. What do these trends mean for the channel? You've been in this space for so long. You must have a crystal ball. What do you think is going to happen here? You know, maybe we'll broaden the question a little bit just from the network, because Eric opened up a lot of really good insights into, hey, just like the whole world of MSP is evolving. How does that relate to the network? Does it relate to the network? Where do you see things going?
Well, first of all, quickly, just to sort of piggyback on something Eric was saying there, which I think is an overarching thing to keep in mind, basically, in terms of all this data. There is change happening in networking and among networking vendors right now. But it happens very slowly. So, I mean, you know, somebody from Cisco looking at that slide that was up before might think, hey, it's all good. We're number one. We were number one before. We're still number one. There is definitely movement happening among vendors, but and we can reality check this with Corey and Travis. But what the vendors tell me is that, especially in SMB and especially at the S end of the SMB spectrum, the refresh cycles on networking gear can be, you know, prolonged. You need a compelling argument sometimes to get an SMB to replace networking hardware that is working just fine. So some of what we're talking about here is happening in slow motion, but is definitely happening. I think the interesting thing here, I mean, one of the trends that I'm seeing lately from some of the networking vendors is the emergence of networking products that are sort of purpose-built for specific use cases. And I think I mentioned Zeisel earlier on in the podcast. You know, just this morning, they announced a new product that's specifically for, it's a Wi-Fi 6 access point specifically for the classroom environment. And so I think one of the things that MSPs are going to be faced with as we go forward here, as you see products like that come along, we've seen products in recent weeks and months come along that are specifically tailored to video surveillance use cases, for example. I think as you see more of these specialized products, MSPs are going to find themselves sort of wrestling with this dilemma of, do I lean towards the efficiencies of standardization, or do I start to bring on board some of these more specialized products that might be a better fit for, particular solutions, particular clients, and particular situations, and then deal with some of the inefficiency trade-off associated with that. I think that's very closely tied to this kind of diversity theme that we've been talking about here.
And I think, to jump on that, that's what we're kind of seeing with solutioning versus best of breed. You can go to a vendor and you say, hey, give me the solution for this market. So if you're putting video surveillance in there, a lot of those 124 vendors that I saw in the switch space were very niche focused. They might have the cameras and they sell you a switch so you can get it all in one-stop shop. Corey, Travis, is that what, are you seeing that too? Are vendors trying to sell, sell you, bundles?
Yeah. My favorite is
laugh there. That's scary.
My favorite is we're a big Sophos shop, and every time we meet with our reps, they keep trying to sell us on Sophos access points. We got to put in Sophos access points, and we keep telling them, hey guys, they're great, but we don't need access points that have a subscription. The Ubiquity product line we've mastered. We have a real deep bench of knowledge. It works great. It's very affordable. We don't have any problems with them. But they're really trying to, everyone's trying to sell a stack now. And it makes a lot of sense. Why? Because when you have a stack, you think of the Apple ecosystem or the Google ecosystem, there's greater control, there's greater ability to manipulate things. Hopefully the user experience is more streamlined and works better. But yeah, we've got some vendors that are trying to do that. Sometimes it works. A lot of times you kind of say thanks, but no thanks.
Hey, I like that. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Eric.
Didn't mean to step on you. Corey, I just wanted to add something, listening to Rich talk about, and kind of more the overarching thing that we're seeing here with these vendors, making that decision from an MSP perspective. Also, I wanted to add this, and this could be an interesting wrinkle. The decisions that we make on who we partner with and where we're skating, where the puck is going to be, can also be impacted by our ultimate goal. I mean, what is what do we want out of our business? Do we want to grow through acquisition? Do we want to exit at a high valuation? If we want to grow through acquisition, then there are other factors that come into play in our consideration of which vendors to partner with. The same with, selling at some point, right? So are we, and again, just another level of strategy here is like, well, is my installed base of gear ready for, to stand the test of time and be attractive to maybe an acquirer, or will it serve me well? And can I deploy that and standardize it across the folks that I'm looking to acquire? And if I'm looking at them, what are they using for these services and solutions? So there's, another level of kind of strategic discussion from that perspective. Sorry to jump in.
No, it's all good. Yeah, back to the bundling things. We see a lot, right? We see people like WatchGuard and Sophos integrating with backup vendors. So everything is a stack and a thing. They're pulling everything in. But we're also seeing a lot of consolidation in this space as well. HPE when they bought Aruba, we see Cisco when they bought Meraki, and then Cisco has their high end, and then they have their small business line. So it gets a little cloudy in there as well. But what we try to tend to hang out with is if you build a solid foundation of saying, hey, it's got to be a managed switch. We try to go 100% PoE all the time, right? So whether you have cameras, Wi-Fi, IP phones, whatever, it will lay on it. And we try to stay away from the niche stuff unless it's absolutely positively have to, because just about everything out there runs well on a good managed PoE layer 2 and or layer 3 switch. That's pretty much the standard. And then we go looking from there to figure out, does this fit our customer? Is it going to roll? And then what kind of uplinks we need. But yeah, everybody's stacking, bundling, trying to put some stuff together. And in some cases, it looks good. We believe it is going to be there, but I go back to, what Travis said on the Ubiquity side. For us, I don't have to have it. It comes into a hiring of talent, right? We all know that in this industry, we have a tough time finding good technical talent going forward. You know, if I got all the Ciscos and the HPEs and all those guys, there's a price tag that comes with and trying to find a good CCNA, NP, DE, or whoever to come in and try to support this. What we're also finding is by going out with the Dells and the other guys, as well as the Ubiquities, my guys pick that up quick and they're off and running, right? It's a feather in their cap and they keep it moving. So that definitely helps us out on being able to ensure the talent stays in line with what we're doing and how we acquire new talent as well.
Yeah, and in terms of the stacks, you know, one of the things that we're finding a lot of our vendors trying to do is, you know, when it comes to like Meraki or some of the Sophos access points, they want to do subscriptions. And we've walked into acquiring some new clients that had managed firewalls, managed switches, managed access points as a service. And in theory, you know, from the MSP's perspective, it sounds great to have that recurring revenue for a device. However, when you do the math on switches in particular, which, you know, for most small, medium-sized businesses, you know, you're going to get probably, if you're not growing crazy, you don't have major changes in the organization, if you're going to see those devices last, let's call it 5 years, putting those on a managed firewall or managed switch rotation, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And we have to keep reminding our vendors that sometimes subscriptions don't work or they don't really make sense.
So I advanced the slide forward as you guys were talking, because you really were talking about what's important for you as you evaluate your clients and how you identify your needs. So the question you just answered, or the comment you just made about hardware as a service, infrastructure as a service, yeah, time and a place. It makes sense in some environments. It doesn't. We use it. Actually, we have an MSP, and we encourage them to do that because we're growing so quickly. It was like, you just figure this out and take what money you need to make sure that, you know, it's your problem, not ours. So, you know, it kind of depends on the environment. Rich, you know, outsiders view into the, what do you think as you talk to end clients and vendors? You know, what do you think is really important right now for evaluating a vendor, for evaluating the you know, the solution? Can you share some thoughts on channel programs, that kind of thing?
Yeah, you know, I mean, we're talking, there's a lot of change going on in the marketplace. We're talking about some of those trends and some of those changes, but I mean, I think the core answers to that question are you know, tried and true, unchanging in a certain way. You know, I mean, you're obviously looking for vendors who are as much, you know, exclusively through the channel as possible. You know, you're looking at the depth of their technical resources and their sales assistance that they can offer. You know, you're looking at the kind of commitment they have to your particular business model. If you're an MSP and you're stacking vendors up against one another, especially if you have, you know, made the decision to offer something like a managed firewall or managed Wi-Fi, you want to be working with vendors who are committed to that model as well and have products and pricing and partner program offerings that go along with that. So not a lot of new things to be looking for there, but you know, they have stood the test of time for a reason. They're very important characteristics to be looking for.
Eric, what do you think here?
I mean, I think looking at it from you know, from an MSP's ability to deliver the best service, right? So take away the manufacturer or vendor and look at what the business needs, right? The business needs, if you categorize these things, you know, there's 10, 12, 14, 15 categories of things that a business might need that we may be able to support. I think, you know, rather than talk about kind of the obvious things of selecting these solutions, I will answer it in a way that makes the most sense for the MSP and then in turn the client benefits. And that is, how well do these solutions and devices play with each other? How well can we integrate them into our PSAs or ticketing system and RMM solutions? How do we consolidate these most effectively to allow us to deliver the best type of service from a response and remediation perspective, and to give us the data points that we need in order to provide valuable trending and have great strategic review meetings with our clients to show them how, more effectively, how additional investments in their infrastructure can help them achieve their ultimate business goals and maybe accelerate the attainment of some of their business milestones, right? So, you know, how do we become the best resource to them by integrating our solutions and selecting the solutions and devices and vendor solutions that integrate the best in order to provide that statistical data, so that when we're spending time with our clients during our strategic reviews, the value add there is that strategic analysis and helping guide them forward through wise investments.
Very insightful. Corey, how do you respond to that?
So
you just agree?
we evaluate, yeah, we evaluate this based on the level of support that we have told the customer that we're going to give them, right? So if we have to support, you know, a switch or something we don't know or haven't seen, and we just have a bad relationship and we've seen bad situations, there's no way we'll be able to uphold the commitment that we have told that customer for network stability and things from that perspective. The other piece we come by is over the last few months, we put a lot more effort on really analyzing how our vendors secure themselves and how they handle that patching scheme. Because at the end of the day, that's what really started to resonate with us as MSPs, is how often are we patching and how good are those patching, their patch status and their firmware upgrades, and how intrusive is that to our client's network. And by having fewer choices of switches to be able to manage that, it gives us a better insight into that, and it gives us a little bit more of a playground to play with, because we got some test cases that we can rely on and says, hey, we just upgraded this firmware to X in a larger client or a smaller client, and we're pretty comfortable with rolling that out. In other words, after we've tested in our own lab as well. But the main thing is really looking at their stability, their business model. Like, we got some accountants right now, but we can't even touch their network for the next 2 or 3 months because they're right in the middle of tax season. And if we didn't have a good switch, or we didn't have something that we could rely on, they'd be hating us. They come December, they'd be calling us up ready to switch.
Yeah, I think you brought up something really insightful there that I've started to talk about as well, which is, yeah, you know, you evaluate the vendor, you know, you look at the price, you look at the functionality that you need for the client's network, but it's the total cost of ownership above and beyond the subscription price. It's the, how many CVEs are there? How often do they need to be patched? What security vulnerabilities are we finding? What do we need to do to stay on top of it? Because security is becoming more and more top of mind for most SMB clients as well as the MSPs. Because, you know what, I like to say, hackers are super lazy. They'll go the path of the least resistance. If you've got a level 9 or, you know, a score of 9 CVE open on your firewall and you can take full control of it, well, that's a lot easier than doing something else, trying to do a brute force attack. So I think it's really insightful there, Corey. Travis, how does that weigh into your decision making? You said you use Netgear, Dell. How do you look at stuff like the security patching and vulnerabilities, and how do you stay on top of that in order to make sure your clients are more and more secure every day?
Sure. So, you know, as others have mentioned, we take the model approach of defense in depth. So you've got to have multiple layers. You don't just rely on antivirus or a firewall. It's a holistic solution, and that's how we architect security solutions in general. You know, one of the things that I would say that we focus on doing right now is trying to educate our clients on the fact that really what technology vendors have done, and this is really MSPs should be evolving into, and that is we are data protection experts. Our job is to protect our clients' data from exfiltration, and theft and ransomware and corruption of data, et cetera. So really our job is to secure that data. And so when we are evaluating solutions for firewalls in particular, switches less so, but firewalls in particular, that's the top of our list. And that's why we ended up going with Sophos as a vendor, because they have what they call a synchronized security stack, where the endpoint security talks to the firewall, and it gives us all of that data in a single pane of glass, along with EDR and a whole bunch of other functionality. And lest I sound like I'm a shill for Sophos, it ticks all the boxes as far as our business is concerned. They're continually investing in their product line. They are continually pouring tons of money into research and development. They are continually staying ahead of the curve on upcoming threats, to go back to the hockey analogy that was used earlier. And so we put our trust into that, and we train our team accordingly. So what we're looking for our clients is that which gives us the most insight into the security of the organization with the least amount of work or third parties or integrations or customized solutions. And we're finding that from players like Cisco and from Sophos. They're taking it seriously. And the clients that we are most successful with are the clients who see that as a legitimate risk, as a legitimate investment, and they want to see us take the reins and show them what's best.
So I think that's a great segue to my next and last question of the day. You talked a lot about Sophos being a great partner for your business, but you also said earlier on that you chose not to use their access points because it just was a good fit. So, standardization is something it sounds like you really believe in. You have different standardization stacks for different types of customers depending on their needs. But is this, and I'll ask everybody on the panel, and we'll wrap it up for today. Is this still the ultimate goal for the MSP? In order to drive efficiency, should this be top of mind, or should something else be of higher importance? So Travis, I'll start back with you, then we'll go over to Corey.
As far as I'm concerned, standardization really should be top of mind. As we discussed a couple of weeks ago, our line here is you don't bring a steak to the steakhouse. When we walk into a new client and the organization isn't up to spec, or we're in a co-managed IT environment where we're backing up an internal IT department, we generally try to be selective in those organizations that are going to be receptive to our stack and our solutions, because then we can guarantee it, then we can better control it and manage it, and ultimately there's a better outcome. So for us, yeah, I think standardization is a pretty important goal.
Excellent. Corey.
Yeah, I agree. Standardization should definitely be top of mind. I just want to also make sure that standardization doesn't mean picking one particular vendor for everything. It could be that mix, right? It could be the ubiquity with the Sophos, with the Dell switch, but that will be your stack because that's what you trust in and where you go from. I will be the first to tell you that standardization, it's hard, right? It's hard because sometimes you inherit some things that you picked up to gain the client, but if you haven't started those conversations or going for it, it's a great opportunity in your QBRs and you're meeting with customers as you're setting that strategic technical direction for that client. It should be definitely pushing them to standardize on your stack to help you bring better support, to help you as a business. But in the end, I think the customer is going to benefit 1,000-fold from going down that path as well.
Well, I think, to Travis and Corey's point, you guys are both mature MSPs. You get it. You're not shopping based on the price. You're shopping on what's best for you. And in turn, what's best for you is best for your client because you'll be able to deliver a great standard of service. So, Eric, that is the perfect segue to you. Final thoughts on the data we've shared here today. What do you want to leave the listeners with?
I think what I'd like to leave everyone thinking about is, how can we skate toward where that puck is going to be? And we've heard that change is hard, standardization is hard. It is really difficult, but if I were to, kind of my little drop the mic moment, I'll say this. The only way that we can increase our profitability after we sign a client to a managed service agreement is to reduce our costs and increase our efficiencies. So if it is our goal to continue to increase profitability quarter over quarter, year over year with long-term managed service agreements, we need to look at those costs and those efficiency improvements, and standardization is a big discussion point in that effort.
I think that's again, that's exactly where the puck is going, right? So everyone who knows me I love sports, wink. But I think it's very insightful. Rich, final thoughts.
Yeah, I think the four of us are in violent agreement about this point. We talk to a lot of MSPs at Channel Pro. When we look at what the most successful, the fastest growing have in common, I sometimes refer to it as the 3 S's, which is specialization, scalability, and standardization. Standardization is absolutely key. And I like the way that it's written on the slide here. Standardization should be the ultimate goal. You can be excessive about standardization in ways that might trip you up at times, but it should always be one of your top priorities. Because we see again and again and again the companies that are most profitable and have the fastest growth take standardization very seriously.
All right. Well, I have one more slide in there, but we're going to skip over that today because I think we already covered that topic. So first of all, I wanted to thank everybody on the panel here for joining. Guys, I think it was an awesome conversation. We had done a lot of prep for this webinar. I think everyone was really, really valuable insights into standardization of MSPs, how to grow faster, what to look at. We talked about some great vendors. So I want to personally thank you for joining today, and hope you found this useful. Hopefully our audience found this useful. Feel free to reach out to any of us. I know we all have strong opinions. That's why I like these guys. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. Just on the theme of bettering your business, helping you learn how to grow, what are the other best practices in the industry. If you haven't checked out Frankly MSP, the podcast, some of the members of this panel today have been on here just sharing tips and tricks, what's worked for them, what they've heard. And we're doing that live event coming up in January of next year. So go check out Frankly MSP Live. If you're interested, check it out. Have fun.